Welcome to the New York Beef Banter podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Rodriguez, registered dietitian. The New York Beef Banter podcast was created by the New York Beef Council as a way to connect consumers with beef industry experts to give you a spot at the fence post to a candid and transparent conversation about beef and what it takes to put it on your plate. My guest today is Betsy Hicks of Maple Acres in Cortland County, and she also has a really unique background and expertise for us to talk today about animal nutrition and how it is similar and different to human nutrition. Betsy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm super passionate about this topic, and Jean said that we're going to geek out together on this podcast today, and I think we are. So I'm excited to be here.
For sure. So Betsy, tell me a little bit about your educational background and how you became an expert on this topic of animal nutrition.
Yeah, sounds good. So I went to local college growing up and studied animal science. I've been around beef cattle my whole life. And when you go to your first 4-year school, you think about what things really drive you. And I loved my nutrition classes. And so that drive and learning more about nutrition and how special cows are because they're ruminants, right? That drive to figure out why cows are so unique and why we need to feed them differently. That drive led me to go to a university in the Midwest, University of Illinois, go Illini, to study animal nutrition. Excuse me. And so my main focus was actually in dairy cattle. So I have a role with Cornell Cooperative Extension as a full-time job that I work with dairy producers. But beef cattle are pretty darn close too. Beef cattle are probably a little bit easier than dairy cattle. So my training is in animal science, dairy nutrition, animal nutrition, basically. So it's a lot of fun.
All the good things, all of my favorite animals that bring my favorite foods to my plate.
Yes.
Right. Like it doesn't get better than that. So is there any crossover between human and animal nutrition? Because it sounds like you're really well versed in both.
So, we've got our main nutrients, right? We've got protein, we've got carbohydrates, we've got fats, we've got water, all of those things are things we look at, whether you're an athlete or just a person trying to balance their diet, right? You have macronutrients that you're trying to balance. It's the same thing with cows. But cows are more complicated because they have a rumen. And so we have to balance what the rumen needs. And basically what the rumen is a big population of bacteria that live symbiotically in their gut. And so human nutrition, it's pretty simple if we break it down into those main categories. In cattle nutrition, we do the same thing, but we also have to keep millions and billions of bacteria in their gut healthy. So it is a little bit more complicated.
So that being said, do carbs, protein, and fat have the same effect in humans as they do in cattle? And I guess this would probably be the main difference, the impact of carbohydrate, right, on the rumen and how different things work in there because it's a different sort of ecosystem. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the main difference, right, between humans and cattle is the rumen. And so when we talk specifically about carbohydrates, so carbohydrates are a source of energy, right? And carbohydrates can be fiber, which is great. And carbohydrates can be starch or sugar. And those things are degradable in the rumen. The rumen bugs can break them down at different rates and to different extents, right? Fiber might not be digested as much, but carbohydrates of sugar and starch are really rapidly degraded because those bacteria, they can really get in there and break down those carbohydrates really rapidly. So when we balance a diet for cows, we try to balance out how many sugars and how many starches that those cows are eating because we don't want that population of bacteria to like break it down really, really, really fast, because the rumen is very sensitive to pH changes. And so if we break down sugars and starches really rapidly, the pH of our rumen drops. And we want a nice balanced rumen, like 7 pH, very neutral. When we break down sugars and starches, that pH of that rumen drops really rapidly, and that's not healthy for our rumen bugs. They love it until they die, and we don't want rumen bugs to die.
It sounds really similar to some of the trends, well, things that are becoming trendier, I suppose, in human nutrition. There's a lot of talk about gut health and probiotics and things like that. So it sounds like similar care for a similar part of the digestive system in some
Right.
ways.
Yeah, in some ways, absolutely. We want to keep the ruminant bacteria population very healthy, and we want to feed them the right things because they in turn feed the cow in the hindgut. We can also feed probiotics to cows as well to help keep a healthy bug population in their rumen, or healthy, I don't know if people call them bugs. In the cow world, we call rumen bacteria bugs. It's just what we do.
There we go.
So,
I'm going with that.
yeah. It's, it's healthy rumen bugs. So if I say anything that sounds kind of funny, it's just, we're cow people. We just talk funny sometimes.
So all of that being said, what's the most important either ingredient or nutrient of a cow's diet?
So super great question. There is no one nutrient that is perfectly important. They're all important, and their balance is what is very important. If we only fed them a diet of just corn, would they be able to survive? Sure. But would they be able to thrive? No. If we just fed them really poor quality dry hay, would they be able to survive? Sure. Would they be able to thrive? No. So the balance of good fibers, good starches, good sugars, things we find in good quality hay, all of those things in balance are very, very important. We can't feed a diet high in fat and expect the rumen bugs to like it. They won't. Fat and rumen bugs don't get along that great. So we want a balance of fat, of fiber, of protein, and of course, water. Water is super important to cows too.
So you're bringing something to mind that I've heard kind of like on farm tours and things like that before. I've heard it said, you don't feed the cattle, you feed the rumen, right? Is that kind of like the catchphrase to keep in mind? So whatever those rumen bugs like, we have to keep that in mind. It's not.
Yeah,
something to be
absolutely.
discounted.
If we don't keep the rumen population happy, the cow will not be happy. It really is a symbiotic relationship. So when we feed those rumen bugs to what they need, a little bit of starch, a little bit of protein, when we feed the rumen bugs right, they thrive. When the rumen bugs thrive, the cow thrives. Because what happens is, so in the rumen, it's one of the main compartments of her stomach. The rumen bugs live there. But then as she digests her food, as the rumen bugs help her digest her food, that flows to the small intestine eventually, where she breaks down things, or she absorbs things similar to how a human does. Cows also have a stomach that is similar to our stomach, or a chamber of their stomach, where you add in lots of acids to help further break things down. They have that same chamber of their stomach that we have. It's just beyond the rumen. And so what happens when the bugs pass out of the rumen, they pass into that chamber of their stomach and then in the small intestine. So the cow, I say symbiotic relationship, the cow ends up using the bugs as food, right? They're a great source of protein. Yeah. So it's symbiotic to a point. I mean, the bugs and the rumen bacteria continue to thrive, but some of them pass the hindgut and she digests them. So yeah, I'm totally geeking out. I'm so sorry.
I love it. No, I love it. And so I guess what I really want kind of explained for our audience is, what is because you're mentioning chambers of the stomach being similar to a human stomach, right? And I know there are similarities and there are differences, but if you could really explain that actual digestive tract difference, and how does that really uniquely position cattle to upcycle things like human inedible forage? Because we know they're the ultimate upcyclers, and right, they take all those good plants and make delicious nutritious beef for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, awesome, awesome question. And it really helps, give some background information to our listeners that are like, okay, what the heck am I talking about? So cattle, we know they're ruminant. We've talked about it already for 10 minutes. So they eat their food. Their food is predominantly grass, like you can see in my picture, Nicole. And
Yes.
that's what they eat for 6 months of the year is pasture on my farm. And so, and then this time of year when it's, 10 degrees out, I have stored hay that is dried grasses that they eat the rest of the year. So when they're eating grass, right? You and I can't eat grass. It's fiber. It's a little bit of sugar. It's mainly carbohydrates, a little bit of protein. Perfectly suited for my mama cows. That is a really balanced diet for my mama cows to eat. And so when they eat it, stuff you and I can't eat, they eat it. It passes into their first two chambers of their stomach, their reticulum and their rumen. And their rumen, my cat is about to jump on something. I'm so
Cats are
smart.
welcome here too. Cats are welcome
Oh,
on the
he's
New York
looking
Beef
at
Banter podcast.
working from home. It's so fun. So when the cows eat their feed, whether it's pasture or dried hay or baleage, which is a fermented hay crop, when they eat it, it passes into their rumen and their reticulum. And we all talk about chewing their cud, right? So
Yeah.
their cud is what they bring up from their rumen that is partially digested feed. It's what the bacteria in their rumen are working on breaking down those bits of fiber that we as humans can't digest because we don't have a rumen, right?
Right.
So she's chewing her cud, bringing up those bits of fiber and digesting it and then swallowing it back down. And so the rumen takes particles that are like, 4 inches long and breaking it down in size to, millimeters long. And when the forage is really, really small millimeters, it can pass to the next chamber of the stomach. And so the rumen, I don't know, is like 50 gallons, just say, and it's what feed she ate today in big particles. It's what feed she ate yesterday in smaller particles. And then the feed that is passing through to the next chamber of the stomach. So it's a lot of water. It's a lot of feed. It's a lot of saliva. And it's rumen bugs. So in the next chamber, it helps take out the water out of that fluid. And then the fourth chamber is the chamber that is like our stomach, the abomasum, where all those stomach acids go in to help break down the rest of everything. So that fourth chamber is the chamber that is very similar to a human stomach. And then after that, it's small intestine, large intestine, and then out the back door.
So I have some kind of like capacity and volume questions in a moment, but I just want to make sure I'm getting this clear. So it sounds as though cattle are able to take in these not only human inedible forage, right? But they're able to have sort of a first pass with larger pieces, right? Like you and I have to really masticate our food because it's not coming back up. We're not doing this thing where we're chewing cud, right? We're not out there like rah, rah, rah. So they're taking these larger pieces, like larger, can I say like, I don't know, I want to say like twigs, leaves, just like bigger particles and things. And then they go down, but then come back up to be rechewed, and that's cud. And then when they're chewed down again, they can take the entire pass through the entire rumen. Is that right?
Yeah. So it's two actions, right? So you talk about mastication or the act of chewing. Yeah. So that's great because it helps to take the particle size of that piece of hay or piece of grass that they're eating. It helps physically break apart that piece of grass into smaller pieces. And then chemically, so physically chewing, chemically, the bacteria are able to get into those nooks and crannies that are by the chewing action to help chemically break down the feed that she's eating. So it's really the two of them working hand in hand, cow chewing cud, making things smaller, and then the bacteria through the action of saliva getting in there and helping to break things down and making things wet. And then the bacteria can help to get in there to break food down further. If we had a rumen, sure, we could eat grass and be able to turn all of this food into something we can eat. But the act of us eating fiber is like, it's it's gut fill, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a different story. Otherwise, Betsy is in front of this beautiful photo of this beautiful green pasture and her herd. I would just be out there with them, if only that it were that easy and I had that rumen. To volume in a minute, but you brought up another question. So is their saliva very different from ours? Are there different enzymes in their saliva or anything like that?
That's a great question. And honestly, I'm not sure on that. I know, and maybe you know the human makeup of saliva. In cows, it's a lot of sodium bicarb, which is a buffer, which helps neutralize things in the rumen, helps keep a healthy rumen pH. That's the main component. And probably my ruminant nutrition friends are saying, Betsy, you're forgetting like 5 other important things, but that's the main important part.
Maybe we'll get out there and do some like swabs and do a comparison. I'm going to come visit and compare mine with one of those beauties that are behind you there. So I think we have a pretty clear idea of like how the rumen works and that it's this balance of macronutrients just like in humans, right? But how much does a cow eat and drink in a day, and like how many hours are spent, how many hours of their day is devoted to nutrition, like sitting there eating and drinking and hanging out?
Yeah. So we as humans, we'll eat, some people eat 2 meals a day, some people eat like 5 because they snack. If you like to snack, boy, being a cow would be like the perfect thing because cows eat all day long, honestly. You think about a cow, and if we had cows out on the range, or cows, that weren't domesticated, bison, buffalo, relations, they would be prey, right? They're not predators, they're prey. And so that's why cows evolved to have a rumen, because they're out there grazing during the day, and then they can go hide or be in their herd later and digest their food whenever they want. So they can graze throughout the day and then go relax with their buddies and digest their food. It's the way they evolved as because they're prey. Where predators are going to gorge themselves on a meal and then say, oh, I guess I need to eat again like 2 days later because now I'm hungry. Cows evolve differently because they're constantly on the lookout for what's, going to eat them back in the day. So to get to how much they eat, so they eat like all day long, right? Anytime that I would go down to my barn this time of year and push up feed to them, they'll eat. If I even turn on the tractor, they're like, oh, she's going to feed us. This is lovely. They eat a lot, probably 10 hours a day. They'll be out there munching and grazing. And then how much they eat depends on a couple things. So it depends on their size. It depends on if they're lactating or not. And it can depend on weather as well. So bigger cows will eat more. Kind of a rule of thumb we use is like 2 to 3% of their body weight. That's what they're going to eat. So 1,000-pound cow might eat 20 to 30 pounds of feed a day. And that would be dry feed. So if they're eating pasture is really wet, right? Because it's growing, it's a green crop. Pasture might be 20% dry.
Okay.
So a cow can eat like 60, I'm doing quick math in my head, that is probably wrong, 60 pounds of feed a day. A lactating dairy cow that may weigh 1,800 pounds can probably eat 100 pounds of feed a day. So lactating dairy cows, they're lactating, they're bigger, they're going to eat more. And the more digestible feed we give them, the more feed they can eat because it passes out of the rumen faster.
That all makes a lot of sense. And now that you mentioned, obviously cattle of different sizes will have different nutrient needs, right? As far as volume, just like a bigger person might need more calories to do what they need to do in a day. Right. But do different breeds of cattle have different nutrient requirements? Does that vary at all?
That's a good question. So when we talk about dairy cattle, different breeds of cattle might produce different amounts of components in their milk. Like they might have, like Jerseys and Brown Swiss, they would have a higher amount of butter fat and higher amount of protein in their milk that they produce. And so maybe a little bit different nutrient requirements. Some people say Jerseys in particular have a higher protein requirement. But when we're talking about beef cattle, beef are like way easier than dairy cattle to balance a diet for. So pretty much you give them good quality dry hay and a nice free choice mineral and plenty of water, and they're going to be really happy. So it's a lot more simple with beef cows.
Sounds like a happy life for them, I have to say. So of course, like I get a lot of questions about feed. And one of the questions I get is, does this proper nutrition for the cattle, does it affect the end product? Like, does it affect the beef that we are purchasing, wherever our point of purchase is as a consumer?
So that's a really great question. And, you talked about cows being upcyclers. They can take things we can't eat and, make delicious, nutritious beef. And that's like the great thing, like the grass is grass, right? We're not going to eat lawn clippings, but they can. They can. And they, that's the great relationship they have with their rumen bacteria. They break things down into very simple components. And then it's the beauty of the way that they are built, that they turn beef cows, especially, they turn food into meat. We can vary the taste a little bit, whether we decide to feed grain, which might include corn or barley. But really, like, beef is beef.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And, we take very simple grass products or, plant products, and we turn it into beef that is just amazing. So it's not a very scientific answer, but it's a very simple answer. Beef is beef.
I love it because I like to say that all beef is good beef. And I think we all know there are some of those slight taste differences, right? Slightly different eating experiences, I suppose, sometimes depending on finish. But at the end of the day, like, to me, it's not super significant, and all beef is good beef. And another producer put it to me this way once, that beef farmers and ranchers take green grass, blue sky, and make red meat, and it's all super delicious. So I love that, because it sounds like, well, obviously you all are taking excellent care of your herds, because those cows are going to produce delicious beef, right? But it sounds like a pretty simple formula. Now, in addition to this mostly grass, and when we're talking in the winter, dried grass, this mostly grass and hay, basically, right, diet. Do you live in an area where you get to utilize other human inedible products, anything from other industries? I've been on tour and seen that cattle are eating some really delicious stuff, like leftover potato chips and breakfast pastries and cereal bits and things like that. Is there anything that you've seen or that your own herd gets to nibble on that's super special, or that you're maybe jealous of, like I have been?
So most of the time when you're seeing those byproducts from the human food industry, right? Otherwise they go in landfill if cows didn't eat them, which we don't want that, because cows can, upcycle those as well. Usually if you're seeing those on a farm, that farm generally, not all the time, but generally that farm is probably finishing animals to be finished beef. My farm, we mostly have mama cows. We're a cow-calf operation. I do finish a couple steers for myself and a few close customers, but mostly we're a cow-calf, and my cows they just get grass. Such a boring diet, but they love it.
I love it. Betsy, if you don't mind, can you quickly explain the difference between a cow-calf operation and someone who's a finishing operation?
Yeah. Great question. So we are a cow-calf operation, which means this time of year, my calves are weaned and they're not getting milk from their mothers, and they're growing up and becoming cows themselves. In March, we calve a few of my cows a little bit earlier, but the majority of my herd calves in May. Being a cow calf, we have a calf crop every year. A lot of farmers in New York will calve in May because we're mostly past the bad weather by that point, mostly.
Mostly.
We'll calve once a year. Cow's gestation is the same length essentially as a human, about 9 months. They will raise their calves for 6 to 7 months. And then we go through the weaning time, like I talked about. And so our goal of our farm is for our cows each to have a calf every year that they raise. And then those calves on our farm, some will go to a backgrounder, which raises steers to the next point, and then to a finisher, which would finish for final beef product. But a lot of my animals actually go to other farms to be in their breeding program, because I have registered Black Angus cattle, and I think they're special, but I don't know, some other people do too, but I think they are. So my cows generally go into breeding programs on other farms to help be their mama cows or their breeding bulls. So cow calf, our goal is to raise a calf every single year and then go to another farm for whatever purpose. And then a finishing operation will take steers and feed them appropriately so they gain weight and finish at the appropriate weight that we want our carcass to be. I like to tell people that even though steers are their end goal in life is to become meat, right? But don't confuse length of life with quality of life, because our cattle, whether they're here for 15 years, like one of my cows, or they're here for 24 months, they're loved and cared for. Even the steers that I raise, I get emotional when I put them on the trailer, and the people that help me say, oh my gosh, there goes Beth again. But you know what? I care for my animals, even though they're here for 24 months at a time. So
I love that. I love hearing that unique perspective of someone who is really out there with the cattle and can literally speak to all of the love and care and everything that goes into it. So much. Betsy, I am so grateful for people like you. Thank you for bringing what I call where protein meets pleasure to our plates. So appreciative. Everyone, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Beef Banter, and please tune in to the next one. Thank you so much. This podcast is funded by the Beef Checkoff. The Beef Checkoff program was established as part of the 1985 Farm Bill. The Beef Checkoff assesses $1 per head on the sale of live, domestic, and imported cattle, in addition to a comparable assessment on imported beef and beef products. States retain up to 50 cents on the dollar and forward the other 50 cents per head to the Cattlemen's Beef Promotion and Research Board, or CBB, which administers the National Beef Checkoff program subject to USDA approval. Consumer-focused and producer-directed, CBB and its state beef council partners are the marketing organization for the largest segment of the food and fiber industry.